When I was in my 20s, I thought the future would always stretch endlessly before me, like a chorus waiting to rise. Now, at 51, I see how short the verses really are. I've worked as a sound engineer for nearly 3 decades. The studio was my cathedral, consoles, dials, and quiet, focused minds. I've mixed albums for artists you've never heard of, and a few you've definitely played on repeat. It was a life I loved. Still do. But the tide has shifted. The younger engineers are quicker, hungrier, and cheaper. And while no one has said it aloud, I can see it in their eyes. My time is waning. Evenings have grown quiet. My husband, Michael, still works long hours at his firm, his mind always somewhere distant. It's fine. We were never about grand gestures. We were about reliability, stability, a rhythm, even if sometimes it's more silence than song. But Mark is a different melody altogether. He's Michael's son from his first marriage, and he's been living with us since finishing his post-grad program. 26. Tall, clever, sweet, unfiltered. With Mark, I laugh more than I should. I cry a little less. And sometimes, when the house is still, I wonder when that fine thread between comfort and something else began to shift. We were drinking cocktails that Friday night, our little tradition. The city lights painted the windows in gold, and the hum of jazz filled the background. I feel like I'm becoming obsolete, I admitted after my second gin and tonic. I look at these kids at the studio, and I can see them just waiting for me to fade into the background. Mark raised an eyebrow, his smile lopsided. Everyone would kill to have your energy. And your legs, Lou. You've got supermodel legs. Always have. I laughed, caught off guard by his candor. That's very kind, but not helpful. No, seriously. You know what your problem is? He leaned forward conspiratorially. You don't realize what you've got. And I have an idea. Just trust me. Come with me Friday. Where? I asked. He winked. You'll see. Friday came. He took me to a photography studio tucked between a bakery and an old tailor's shop downtown. The space was warm and smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. His friend Jesse was there, camera in hand, a quiet smile on his face. You said you wanted a new project, Mark said, helping me take off my coat. So let's try something different. Modeling. I scoffed. Not just modeling, Mark grinned. Feet. I blinked. Feet. Your legs and feet are incredible, he said with a chuckle. People pay good money for that kind of thing. There's a whole online market. Niche stuff. Trust me. I looked at Jesse, who gave a supportive nod. Totally legit. Artistic. Classy. I wasn't sure if I was more surprised or flattered. But something about the idea, the ridiculousness of it, the freedom, made me say yes. The shoot was surreal. Jesse poured warm water into a basin, and I dipped my feet into it, the sensation oddly intimate. There were shots of my toes in honey, red pedicured elegance against a white backdrop, even some playful angles with summer sandals and sheer stockings. I couldn't stop laughing. You're a natural, Jesse said, snapping away. That night, Mark showed me a page he'd built on a niche platform. He called it The Art of Louise. I rolled my eyes. You're ridiculous. He only grinned. I'm your manager now. By Tuesday, money appeared in my account. What is this? I asked, staring at the notification. Told you, he said smugly. There's a whole audience for this. They appreciate beauty in forms most people overlook. Feet, legs, hands, ears. And they're paying for it? I was floored. They're celebrating it, he corrected. And you? I started to enjoy the process. It was fun, light, and oddly empowering. Mark and I began doing the shoots more often, skipping the studio altogether. Just the two of us, a camera, and a theme. One afternoon, while taking shots near the bay window, I shifted my position on the velvet ottoman. Mark knelt at my feet, camera in hand, when I noticed the change in his breathing. He froze. Then, abruptly, he stood and left the room. Confused, I waited. When he returned minutes later, he looked embarrassed. He scratched the back of his neck and muttered, Sorry. I boiled over a little. My heart skipped. Mark, I asked gently, Are you okay? He laughed nervously. It's just your feet. They're beautiful. I didn't think it'd affect me like that. I sat still. A strange warmth spread through my chest. I should have felt awkward, perhaps even scolded him. But instead I smiled, softly, curiously. You really like them that much? I teased. He didn't deny it. I wouldn't have thought of any of this if I didn't. There was a silence between us, not uncomfortable, just charged. Show me, I said suddenly. What kind of foot massage do they like? His eyebrows lifted. Seriously? I nodded. If I'm going to be good at this, I want to understand everything. He knelt again, this time with purpose. His hands were warm, his touch careful. The air between us shifted again, heavier, warmer. And though we didn't speak of it aloud, something had begun. It started with the massage. Mark's hands had always been expressive. He gestured when he told stories, tapped against countertops when he was thinking, and now, those same fingers were trailing over the arches of my feet with a quiet, reverent focus. He'd told me once that touch communicates what language cannot. And in that moment, I understood what he meant. It wasn't overtly sensual, not then. But it wasn't just clinical, either. It lingered in that strange space between intention and restraint. His touch was sure but tentative, like he was exploring unfamiliar territory that felt sacred. My breath slowed. My thoughts dulled. I simply felt. I watched a video, he said softly. It's like reflexology. Pressure points. Some people say it releases endorphins. I believe it, I murmured, eyes fluttering shut. He pressed gently along the ball of my foot, and I let out a slow breath. You're surprisingly good at this. Thanks, he said, but his voice was tight, nervous almost. You're easy to read. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Michael, listening to the rhythm of his breath. Steady, predictable, distant. I turned onto my side and stared at the shadowed ceiling. My legs still tingled from Mark's touch. The weeks that followed blurred with an easy, growing rhythm. Mark and I shot content 3 or 4 times a week. We experimented with props, rose petals, honey milk baths. We laughed often, sometimes too much. And in the quiet moments afterward, when he'd review the shots beside me on his laptop, our shoulders touching, I'd catch him glancing at me. Not just my feet. Me. You know, he said one afternoon, scrolling through images of my red pedicured toes resting in crushed ice. You're the only person I've ever met who can be both intimidating and comforting at the same time. I turned to him with a smile. What does that even mean? He shrugged. You walk into a room and people notice. You've always had presence. And then, when you're with me, you're just Lou. Lou. Only he ever called me that. The photos were doing well. Very well. My account was growing faster than I expected, and the money followed. I was still working at the studio, but now I did so with a little more ease, knowing I had something else that was mine. Unconventional, yes, but mine. Mark was thrilled. He kept tabs on engagement, answered messages, handled payments. I'm really proud of you, he said one evening, handing me a glass of Pinot as we sat on the couch, barefoot and relaxed. I smirked. Proud? You make it sound like I just won a scholarship. No, I mean it, he said. Most people wouldn't dare do what you're doing. Especially not with their stepson managing everything. The word hung between us. Stepson. I looked at him. His expression was unreadable, but his cheeks were faintly pink. Does it feel weird to you? I asked quietly. What? This. I gestured between us. The shoots. The massages. The attention. He didn't answer right away. Then, it would feel weirder not to like it. His voice was low. Intentional. I sipped my wine to buy time. My pulse fluttered at my throat. A week later, during another shoot in the sunroom, something shifted. Again, he was kneeling in front of me, camera poised, as I draped my legs over a velvet ottoman in soft morning light. My robe hung loose, just enough to show the tops of my thighs, bare and smooth. Hold that pose, he murmured. I did. Then he lowered the camera slowly. His eyes didn't move away. His breathing deepened. I need a break, he said, standing abruptly. I watched him disappear into the hallway, heard the faint sound of a door closing. And I knew. I waited. When he returned 10 minutes later, he couldn't meet my eyes. You don't have to explain, I said softly. But he did. I didn't plan for this, he said. It started as a joke, a way to help. But now, when I'm taking the pictures, I forget I'm supposed to be your what? My stepson. The air thickened, heavy with honesty. And I forget I'm supposed to be your mother, I whispered. We sat in silence, the line between us now drawn with flickering shadows and fragile breaths. He reached for my foot, almost instinctively, and began to massage it again. But this time, everything felt different. His hands trembled faintly. I let him continue. We said nothing. But when his thumb circled the arch of my foot, and I let out the softest sigh, his eyes lifted to meet mine. There was a question in them. A boundary unspoken, but barely there. I didn't pull away. Instead, I reached out and touched his cheek, just for a second. "Mark," I said. "What are we doing?" He didn't answer. He leaned in, and I let him. Our lips met featherlight. Hesitant. Searching. When we pulled back, everything had changed. And yet, nothing had. We never spoke of it again. Not directly. Our sessions continued. So did the photos, the massages, the moments between them. The stolen glances. The smiles that said too much. The silences that said even more. I told Michael I was going to yoga on Saturdays. But I was with Mark. Sometimes in the car, parked by the waterfront. Sometimes in a rented hotel room with filtered light and white sheets. Sometimes under the trees in the far corner of the park, lying on a blanket, pretending the world didn't exist. We kissed now. Openly. Softly. But that was all. A line remained between us. A fragile, trembling line neither of us dared cross, yet. And the unspoken truth burned hotter than any flame. It was ours. Our secret. Our pose. It was a strange kind of joy, one that clung to me in the quietest hours. Not the explosive kind, but the kind that simmers beneath the surface, that hides behind polite smiles and mundane conversations. The kind you carry like a fragile trinket in your coat pocket, running your fingers over its edges when no one is looking. I kept mine hidden from my husband. Michael still left early and returned late, tired and inattentive. We barely touched anymore. I told myself this was just what marriage becomes over time, a slow drift into polite companionship. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. I was no longer drifting. I was falling. Mark and I saw each other nearly every day. He was careful, thoughtful. It became second nature for him to read my mood the moment I stepped into a room. If I was tired, he made coffee. If I was sad, he played my favorite music. If I was quiet, he sat with me in silence, just close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. And every time we touched, during a photo shoot, a massage, a casual graze in the kitchen, it was as if something lit behind my skin. We never crossed the line, but we stepped right up to it. Again and again. One late afternoon, we took the camera to the old greenhouse at the edge of the park. The place had long been abandoned, but the light that poured through the broken panes of glass was warm, golden, and dreamlike. I was barefoot, wearing a linen dress that kissed my knees with every breeze. Mark set up a stool and adjusted the reflector. I sat down, posing with my legs slightly crossed, a basket of lemons resting near my feet. He snapped a few shots, then lowered the camera slowly. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Like you were meant to be here. Like the light is jealous of you." My stomach fluttered. That's dangerously poetic for a photographer. He smiled, walking toward me, the camera hanging loosely in one hand. "I mean it. Every time I see you through the lens, I forget I'm supposed to be documenting. I just feel." The way he looked at me, it was the kind of gaze a woman doesn't expect to receive at 51. Not from a man in his 20s. Not from her stepson. But there it was. Undeniable. And I wanted to fall into it. He set the camera down on the bench and knelt in front of me, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "We don't have to pretend anymore," he said, his voice low. "I know you feel it too." I didn't respond. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed him again, gently, deeply. He tasted like summer and longing and something unnameable. After that day, everything changed, but not on the outside. On the surface, we kept the routine. Yoga on Mondays. Grocery runs on Wednesdays. Yoga again, of course, on Saturdays. But in the spaces between those obligations, Mark and I carved out a world that belonged to no one but us. One evening, we found ourselves in the backseat of my car, parked at the edge of an overlook, the city glittering far below like a jewelry box left open. He rested his head on my thigh, his hand curled loosely around my ankle, tracing the shape of my foot with the tip of his finger. "Do you ever think about what this is?" he asked quietly. I stared out the windshield. "All the time. And I hesitated. "I think this is the most alive I've felt in years. I don't know what that makes me, but I know I don't want it to stop." He didn't speak for a while. Then, "You know this can't last forever, right?" "I know." But knowing didn't make it easier. Knowing didn't stop me from craving every moment we shared, or from imagining his hands on me when I closed my eyes at night, or from finding myself smiling when I caught my reflection in the mirror, remembering something as simple as the way he said my name, Lou. The next time we shot photos, it was at home late at night. Michael was out of town for a conference. Mark set up candles, soft golden light pooling across the floor. I wore nothing but a silky robe and lace-trimmed shorts. Mark moved slowly behind the camera, pausing often, not to adjust the lens, but to take in the moment. He stepped away again, this time sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're beautiful," he said. It wasn't flattery. It was a truth he needed to say aloud. I walked over and sat beside him. "You know," I said, my voice light, "when I was 25, I turned down a modeling contract for a summer sandal company." He turned to me, surprised. "Why?" "I was building my career. I didn't think showing off my legs was a real path." "Funny, isn't it? Now it's saving me." He laughed. I knew I had a good idea. I nudged him playfully. "You always believed in this more than I did." "I believed in you," he said, his voice suddenly serious. He reached for my hand. Our fingers laced together. "You've saved me too, Lou," he said. "More than you know." And then one day it happened. We didn't plan it. We weren't even sure what line we were crossing anymore. But after a particularly long shoot, after a massage that lasted too long and too deep, I found myself leaning into him. Our foreheads touched. His breath hitched. And then his hands slid around my waist, and mine moved to his chest, and the kiss that followed was no longer soft. It was need, pure and quiet and desperate. But then we stopped. He pulled away, gasping slightly. "Lou, wait." I nodded, my pulse thudding against my ribs. I know. We stood there, facing each other, not speaking. We were both trembling, not from fear, but from restraint. The kind that leaves you breathless. The kind that makes your body ache in silence. The kind that ignites more than it soothes. We never spoke of going further, and yet we lingered dangerously close. In hotel rooms, on picnic blankets in shaded corners of the park, in whispered calls late at night. The tension was the thing we never touched, but always felt. And maybe that's why it burned so much hotter. Because we knew we shouldn't. Because we hadn't. Yet. It was a quiet Sunday when everything finally tilted. Michael was out, gone for a full day at a legal seminar downtown. I had told him I might meet a friend for lunch. I didn't. Instead, I texted Mark. "Can you come by around noon?" He replied instantly. Always. When he arrived, the house was humming with stillness, the kind that wraps around you like a hush. I had made coffee, but neither of us drank it. The unspoken had thickened between us like a mist. The photos that day were slow, quiet. My robe slid easily over bare skin, and Mark's camera stayed in his lap more than in his hands. At some point, I sat on the arm of the couch, legs stretched out in front of me. He kneeled in front of me and began to massage them like he always did. But this time, something was different. His eyes never left mine. His hands moved not just with affection, but with reverence. Like they were mapping something sacred. His touch was still gentle, but it held weight, decision. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he whispered. My chest tightened. "Neither do I." He leaned in slowly, almost painfully slow, his lips brushing against my knee, then the inside of my calf. My breath caught in my throat. I cupped the side of his face. And then we kissed. Really kissed. There was no rush, no fumbling. Only heat. Hunger. His arms pulled me gently toward him, and my body followed, pliant and ready and full of that aching vulnerability that comes only from feeling too much. We didn't rush into the fire. We walked to it, hand in hand. It was tenderness and aching finally. Afterward, we lay side by side on the floor, half draped in sunlight and guilt. My head rested on his chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on my arm. We didn't speak. Words would only break the silence that held us, the silence that said, "This is real." And complicated. And impossible. I knew what we were doing was dangerous. I also knew I didn't want to undo it. For weeks after that day, everything we did carried a new weight. When we looked at each other across the kitchen table, it was like sharing a dream only we remembered. When our hands brushed during a shoot, our fingers would sometimes linger. His gaze on me was different now, possessive in the gentlest way. And I had changed too. I walked lighter. I smiled without realizing it. The studio noticed. "Something's different about you," one of the interns said. "Did you cut your hair?" I hadn't. But I had shed something. Or perhaps, I had let something in. Then one evening, Michael came home early. Too early. Mark and I were in the backyard, sitting beneath the old oak tree where the light came through in wide golden streaks. We weren't touching, physically, but the space between us was electric, and anyone with eyes would have seen it. Michael stepped onto the porch. I saw him before Mark did. His face was unreadable. "Lou," he called, his tone clipped. "Can I talk to you?" Mark stiffened but didn't move. I stood slowly and followed Michael inside. He didn't speak until the door shut behind us. "You think I don't notice things?" he asked, voice low. "The way you've been disappearing lately? The changes in your routine." I swallowed. "Michael." I saw the way he looked at you. My breath caught. "Mark," he said bitterly. "My son." There it was. Out loud. Real. "What are you saying?" I asked, buying time. My heart thudded wildly. "I'm saying whatever this is, whoever you've become, it's not the woman I married." I didn't answer. Because he was right. I wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did Mark. I could feel it in the short messages he sent me. "Are you okay?" What did he say? "I'm here if you need me." The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't leave my husband in anger. I left because I couldn't live in the echo of something that no longer existed. I left because silence isn't the same thing as peace. I left because I had already left, emotionally, intimately, long before I stepped out the door. And because I knew what I wanted now. Not a life of shadows, but a life that made me feel. Mark and I didn't move in together. That would have been too fast, too messy. Instead, we met in in-between spaces, sunlit rooms, long drives, little rented cabins by the lake where no one asked questions. We didn't define it. We didn't need to. What we had was its own language. One night, in a quiet motel room with linen curtains and cheap rose-colored lamps, I lay beside him, tracing the line of his collarbone. "Are you ashamed of this?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, brows furrowed. "Never." I nodded, unsure of what I felt. Relief? Sadness? Longing? "Do you think this will last?" I whispered. "I think nothing real can survive unless it's protected," he said. "But yes, I think we're real." I kissed him soft and slow. Because he was right. We were real. Strange. Unfolding. Unfinished. But real. Months passed. The photography account grew until I had to make choices. Step away from the studio, take on creative work from home. I began exploring art again. Drawing, painting, sketching portraits of feet and hands and soft eyes full of longing. Mark encouraged all of it. He didn't need me to be anything but myself. And in the quiet moments, the ones without secrets, the ones with open windows and no shame, I saw the truth of what we had. A connection born not just from desire, but from recognition. He saw me. All of me. Not as a mother. Not as a trophy. But as a woman who had forgotten how to be wanted. And had somehow become whole again.